Photography Daily is a Loading Zone production.
It feels like the last throes of the warm sunshine in my face as we head in towards winter. We'll have the sunshine, of course, the light and the contrast and all those wonderful things that a low sun brings in the winter, but it certainly won't be radiating warmth. And I can feel that warmth on my face on this Photowalk in mid-November now, and actually the sunshine is pouring through the trees here at the very start of this walk. So let me get a reference sketchbook picture to start with. If I just position myself slightly to the right, then the sun shines really, I can see the glare, which is marvellous. Here we go. I'm back with the X Pro 1 with a Samyang 12mm on it. What are we at? f/5.6, 500th of a second, straight into the sunshine, ISO 400, and there we go, another one just for luck, Neil. Yeah, another one just for luck. So this week I'm at Penwood. I've returned from the coast. We had the Isle of Wight, and then of course last week we were in Brighton, but this week I've returned to, well, slightly more locally to myself, to Penwood. I love Penwood. Sprawling acres and acres, thousands of acres of pretty much unspoiled woodland. The only thing that spoils it is you can probably hear the rumble of the A34 road in the background. But as I walk further into the wood, we should lose quite a lot of that. I need to start with some personal history as we walk here today. Prepare yourself. I'm prepared, Neil. Do your best. Well, it was in 2016 with my very good friend Giles. You know Giles, don't you? He rings me sometimes and says, "Stop mentioning me." But I have to, because he's such an important part of my photographic history, is Giles. Anyway, we went to London together to go and see Photo London. And this was in the days we would go around the show, drink a vat of wine for inspiration later on in the afternoon, and then go back in and look at everything through eyes we'd borrowed from a bottle of Chateau Neuf de Fallover. I'm being flippant slightly. These days our poison seems to be extreme coffee in china cups from a flask on one of our woodland walks. We are the epitome of middle-aged rock and roll fellas. But don't let that put you off, kids. David Bowie was a famous sober soldier, and look how cool he was. Anyways, I'm at Photo London with Giles, 2016, and the show everybody is talking about there is Nick Brandt's Inherit the Dust. Put very simplistically, large, wide, vista-like pictures made in sprawling African landscapes where humans have taken land or consumed it at the expense of the animals in East Africa who'd once walked those very landscapes, which have subsequently become urban ones or urban versions. And he put into these landscapes these huge life-size panel prints of animals whose portraits, and I use that word specifically, that he'd made previously. And then he photographed these huge panels in position, in situ, juxtaposed against or with the stuff of human life, like giraffes with mobile cranes nearby, sort of mirroring their necks, or an elephant walking under an underpass, or a lion surveying proudly the land around him, which is now turned into a landfill site. And I think it's fair to say that show impacted us both. I'll reference how it impacted Giles from my memory later on, but speaking for me, I hadn't seen anything like it, or indeed since. And, well, in terms of the subject matter, I think it greatly did leave an impression upon me. Not in a way perhaps it was intended at the time. I mean, I didn't go out and buy an electric car and stop eating burgers and end my habit of buying plastic earbuds to clean my cameras. But I do think it was a subtle change, which has led to small differences in the way that I try to act in the world. I mean, I did change my car a year later for petrol away from diesel, though I know that's a kind of flawed move in many respects. We did introduce meat-free Mondays, which is now spread to most lunchtimes and other evenings. We did, I do try to use the woefully expensive train system in this country, though I'll admit COVID travel saw me take refuge in the car for a while of that. I see them as small gains, and though it's not entirely down to that show that I saw in 2016, a part of it most certainly is. And so when I wrote to Nick Brandt to see if he would come on the show, I fully expected a photographer of his standing and place in the industry and world might be, too engaged otherwise. But you know what? He actually said yes.
Today on the Photowalk.
I think of it as street photography.
Right.
Which may sound odd. It's kind of land art meets street photography. Yes, we put these giant panels in those places, but then I just wanted to wait for the people who live there in those places to be oblivious to those animal portraits. They're just like ghosts in the landscape.
I am beyond excited to be talking with the photographer Nick Brandt on the show today. It's the only photography show like this in the podcast sphere, and you are part of it, where I invite you to walk with me just with our cameras, taking along your letters, your DMs and Facebook messages, which drive the show. Lots of thoughts, creative insight, and also we'll be hearing from former guests with snippets of inspiration, including Tim Johnston on the importance of having a creative outlet in your life, American photojournalist Hayley Sadler on becoming a photographer, and a similar story shared by British photographer and mentor Anna Hardy. I'll give you a flavour of your letters too if you can give me a few moments to share my appreciation for mpb.com, who with our wonderful patrons help fuel the show to be here on time every single week. mpb.com is the number one platform in the UK, the US and Europe when it comes to buying, trading and selling quality used kit online. And we'll be talking about sustainability and change today. And it's true that a picture, a moment can change the way we feel about ourselves and the world around us, and can provoke and change history. And mpb.com put photo and video kit into more hands, more sustainably, helping you to change kit to tell your stories. Every month, visual storytellers, just like you, just like me, sell more than 20,000 cameras and lenses to MPB, which means that you can choose used and get affordable access to kit that doesn't cost the earth in many ways, and in some cases you never dreamt you'd own. And one of the really precious things about buying and selling and trading through them is that you're helping to drive and be a part of the circular economy. And whilst I'm about it and completely moving off script or any form of it, I've now been to their HQ and warehouse in the UK, where packaging is an important part of that connection with the world. You won't find plastic bubble wrap, and any that is sent in is recycled. They package sustainably. And for another year, they've joined forces with One Tree Planted to plant up to 25,000 trees in areas across the globe where there's been deforestation, planting a tree for every camera bought, with a goal of 25,000 trees by the end of this month, November 2021. Being a part of the change is as simple as choosing you. So sell the kit you're not using, trade it in for the kit you need to create, buy used, spend less, and get more. We're also supported, handheld, and produced, as I say, because our patrons help guide the direction of this show by those who subscribe to our Patreon channel, which from the price of one high street coffee per month is helping to build this show so it can continue on its mission to become a super diverse community of photographers from every interest. And we have a patron of the day. I'll introduce you to him later on. So what has this week's mailbag brought us? Well, we talk about nagging self-doubt, and I'm going to try and explain how I personally deal with it, because as creators, well, there's a lot of it about. How dogs are impacting one of our photo walkers in a positive way, that is. We take several walks in history, including one through a German forest with a particularly dark backstory. I have some news. It is the official announcement with date of our first Photowalk retreat that is happening in February. A chance to learn, share, explore and escape the noise More on that later. We meet our younger listeners as they start their adventures photographically. We talk about the C word. No, not the nasty one connected to the virus that shall not be named, but the one that accompanies sleigh bells and jumpers and jerseys that you'd never wear usually for 334 days of the year anyway. And then, well, there's a rather different end to today's show, which I know about now, but prior to making the walk, wasn't aware of. We'll be celebrating the life of an incredibly important photographer at the tail end of this show. It's a real journey today, emotionally as much as, well, educationally, particularly talking with my guest, Nick Brandt. So, I think we should start and walk, don't you? It's that time of year where coffee and Garibaldi's need to be packed. Check. Boots on. Check. Spare batteries, because it's cold. Check. Earbuds in. Check. Lens caps off. Let's walk. Or should I pronounce that as, let's walk? There's a small wooden, it's not so much a bridge, but 3 planks have been laid down to get across this. I feel like a slight brook here. Ooh, I feel like I'm on some sort of outward bound challenge. Oh, I've got to cross it. I thought for a minute I was going to have wet feet to start the show. Right. It's a truly international thing, this photo walk, you know. As I was saying to my guest Nick, half the audience, their audience, my audience, our audience, are now in his neck of the woods, in the States, which is where Nick now lives. The rest are all over the globe, as far-flung as Australia land and Argentina land, as we call them. But a couple of short letters from my neck of the woods to kick us off. Emails, of course, but you know my love of the analogue. So with an analogue connotation, I'll call them letters. A letter here from Peter Cheney. Hello, Neil. Newish listener to the podcast. Enjoy this gentle walk each week, though for me it's often the Saturday morning photo walk, having dropped my son off to judo. Prior to COVID, we could sit there in the hall as parents and watch. Now we're asked to go and do something else, anywhere else, for 90 minutes. While sitting in a Costa coffee and being linked up to a latte machine by intravenous drip sounds appealing, I choose to go elsewhere and take pictures on my own photo walks in and around Bristol. I must admit the ground underfoot is getting decidedly boggy. If I disappear, send out the search party, won't you? It's Brizzle, isn't it? You call it Bristol to us. Brizzle of your local. So the show comes with me, and each week at the start when you say earbuds in, check, let's walk, I have a sudden throwback. Wherever your former radio-ness, if there is such a thing, I can't help but think, and listeners of a certain age, and probably only ones in the UK, might think back to 2 comedy characters called Nicey and Smashy, with their catchphrase, let's rock. Every time you say, let's walk, a small part of me imagines you pushing forward the big lever in the studio that played You Ain't Seen Nothing Yet by Bachman Turner Overdrive. Are you sure you're not wearing a blue shiny jacket, as you said each week? I wonder. All the best, Peter. No, Peter, I'm not. And for those that have never seen that sketch, 2 English comedians that invented these rather cliche radio DJs who spoke in a cliche radio DJ way, and their catchphrase was, before they played Bachman Turner Overdrive at the end of each sketch, would be let's rock, which was loosely, they say, based on a presenter who I had the fortune to work with. He was one of those legendary DJs called Alan Freeman, who used to laugh about the sketch, I remember. Anyway, but no, I'm not trying to be nicey and smashy, or smashy and nicey, whatever way round it went. But yeah, I suppose when I say let's walk, well, there might be a bit of that. That's terrible. I shall have to flagellate myself with a damp copy of the Radio Times. And here's one from Brian with a Y, Akehurst, because the Y is important. Hello, Neil. Really enjoying the new length photo walk show. Thank you to you and your guests. I'm not sure how it works. Either I join you or you join me on my walks around my home village of Anstey, which is in Leicestershire, right next to Bradgate Park, the home and birthplace of Lady Jane Grey. Well, at this point, of course, you can't just say that and move on to the next sentence without me adding in some historical background or context. Lady Jane Grey was the 9 days queen a teenage English noblewoman who reigned as queen from 10th of July, this is 1553, 10th of July until the 19th of July. The truth is, as I read it and got lost down a rabbit hole of Lady Jane Grey history, that actually she didn't fancy being queen too much. She was dead against the idea, and quite literally later on, funnily enough. I suppose aged 15, as she was at the time when she was asked, there are a few other things on your mind, like, I don't know, like hanging out with your friends downtown, perhaps taking a movie with your mates, quick bite at Nando's, back in time for Strictly, I don't know, that kind of stuff. So it wasn't really something that she was keen on, but it all got a bit political. She was persuaded to give the crown back after those few days of being on the throne, and then ultimately it all came crashing down on her a few years later when her head met the executioner in the Tower of London. We seem to have a thing for lopping off heads at that time. It's a gruesome history, isn't it? But anyway, back to Brian with a Y. I've been walking Bradgate Park now for well over a decade, taking pictures of this place in all weathers, all seasons, and also the haunting ruins of Bradgate House. I've been planning to produce these pictures as a local exhibition, but for one thing, my own self-nagging doubt. Oh, Brian, I know what that feels like. Now, the reason I mention this is, upon hearing how many of your guests and those writing in suffer from either imposter syndrome or self-doubt as well, far from it being a negative thing, it's actually gone on to inspire me, made me realise that this kind of flaw is not a lonely place where only I'm allowed, but it's a shared place. I still have doubts about my work, namely why would anybody be interested in what I've done, but your guests' enthusiasm equally plays to my take a chance, Brian side. Looking forward to the winter months now and hoping for some proper snow, which is the missing scene in my collection even after a decade. And then, hopefully, the exhibition. All the best from Brian. Well, so first of all, thank you, Brian, for your mail. And if you feel you'd like to, by the way, please send in some of those pictures, because I would love to feature them. I really would. But self-doubt, as you correctly point out, well, it's not a flaw. And this might sound, I don't know, I hope it doesn't sound like a cliche, but perhaps a friend that you just need to give a bit more attention to. Like one of those people who just seem to need shovying, as my late dad used to call it. Shovey them along a bit. They'll be better if you shovey them. But I have a nagging self-doubt side. Robin Bell, who's to come on the show in a few weeks' time, the fantastic printer. I made the mistake of calling him a master printer, which I think he is. I mean, when you look at who he's printed for, I mean, it's like an A to Z of famous photographers. But I think part of that played to his self-doubt side, because he said to me, I keep thinking one day I'm going to be found out. And after all these decades of printing for the most fabulous photographers, and some of the most famous pictures have gone through his darkroom. Self-doubt, nagging self-doubt. Oh, I have a self-doubt side, and my one, I would suggest, Brian, is on one of the first few flaws of my mind, and that's with an FLOORS. Let me try and briefly explain. I like to think of my brain or my mind like a great big tall skyscraper. Bear with me. You get the entrance lobby, which is kind of bright and inviting, and all the life experiences, they come off the street and they enter my consciousness via that entry lobby. But to try and keep the bad ones in check, there's a great big doorman there called, I don't know, let's call him Clubber, whose job it is to try and stop all the nasty experiences from getting to the elevators and letting their self-doubt and nagging dampen all the fun and enthusiasm of all the great experiences. One job, that's all Clubber has, one job. And if the experience isn't wearing the right kind of sneakers or shoes, he's not coming in. But all these different flaws of my mind, and as I grow older, there's lots and lots and lots and lots of them. They all have different names. Sort of ding, welcome to floor 96. Sporting moments. where for a glorious moment football was coming home. Ding, floor 53, musical floor. Nothing but great tunes associated with great memories, that kind of thing, really. But then Clubber occasionally has to go and take a break and go to the men's room, which, as we both get older, seems to be a bit more often. And the experience is wearing the wrong kinds of sneakers. Well, they manage to get in and up in the elevator, and they zip to the top where they start new floors. Or worse still, they get out some of the other floors and try and spoil the fun. And just to put it into context, before you think I've gone completely la-la here, Clubber let one very early on in my life. He let one in called Nagging Doubt. And on its floor that it set up, there are lots of sort of side offices and departments and small rooms where all the self-doubt clubs, they all collect together. And sometimes they go off and see which floors they can spoil the fun for. But, and here's the thing that I think I've gleaned, I think I've learned, although it's a work in progress since the first few years of my life when Clubber let self-doubt in, and Nagging Doubt rather, I do, and I've managed to find this sort of dogged determination to say, why not? Why not be a broadcaster? Why not aim for the top? Why not start a photo business? Why not make a portrait of the Queen, or ask at least? That one I haven't managed to do yet. But feeding that sort of why not notion in your life is sometimes difficult. You have to nurture it somewhat, don't you? But Nagging Doubt, it'll always be there, and that's Clubber's fault in my case. But I know it's only trying to spoil the fun, and it has no more power. It's not the key holder to my skyscraper, that's for sure. Anyway, it made sense to me when I made these notes. I hope it has to you. Shall we take some inspiration? Yes, please, Neil. From Tim Johnston, episode 29, talking about the joy of working on your own with a camera, being at one with your photography, how empowering it is just having a creative outlet. And I guess that's what we're talking about here, really, isn't it? Which for me on my own photo walks means that I can silence, if only for a few moments sometimes, I can silence that nagging doubt, and hopefully you'll be doing the same right now.
My wife gets quite annoyed with me sometimes, as supportive as she is when I have my camera, because it is quite sort of a very one-dimensional relationship when I have my camera, and it really does close everything else out. So even going on photo walks or hanging out with other photographers doing some photo shoots or whatever, it's always a bit more difficult because you don't have the ability to completely focus, whereas you do on your own. And I think that people need to have, as a species, as human beings, we need to have some kind of outlet that allows us to focus and allows us to express our sort of creative instincts, because I think we all have them. It might not be a camera for somebody, it might be painting or drawing or making something. But I firmly believe that in order, especially in our society, in this kind of westernized culture that's so focused on consumerism and always working hard and all these other things, or simply just consuming, whether that's entertainment or, YouTube, Netflix, whatever, the ability to actually then create outside of that, I think is a good way to break that mindset.
The Friday Photo Walk, me with my camera, us with our cameras, and me with my microphone as well, with your letters and your DMs. Thank you very much for all the messages that you're sending in. The email address is, as always, studio@photographydaily.show. Studio@photographydaily.show. I've managed to find myself in a very, very boggy part. I came off the path a bit because I kept bumping into dog walkers, and you know me. I like this photo walk to be sort of exclusively you and me. I don't like to share it with too many others that are out walking their dogs thinking, what on earth is that person doing? Talking into a microphone. I think it unnerves some people, particularly if they can't see I'm talking into a microphone. I know sometimes when people come up behind me, walking their dogs, walking a tad faster than I am, and there's some chap walking along, appearing to be talking to himself. I feel I have to explain to them, it's all right, it's a podcast. But anyway, Tim Johnston just a moment ago. We should have Tim back on the show. It's always, it was a real pleasure to have a a chat with Tim about what it means to be creative, that sort of emotional, mental benefit of finding your creativity. Right, talking of finding, I found myself on my way back to the path, although I've got another slight stream to jump over here. We could yet have the soggy feet, wet feet episode. Right, two to jump over. First one, here we go. The second one's over here. This one is another one of those. Well, it's a bit like a log flume. Is it log flume or log walker? Let's see if I can make this one. That'd be a terrible tightrope walker. 1, 2, 3. Here we go. Fantastic. Right, Facebook. Good heavens, you've illuminated our private Facebook group with incredible talking points this week. You really have. I could do a whole show on what you've been sending into Facebook alone. So thank you very much for that. If you're not a member, you're very welcome to become a part of it. We do have door people there, but they're not like Clubber. We have the convivial and welcoming Neil Ford and the acciante Emily Renier. That was a terrible pronunciation, wasn't it? Emily will now tell me off. I'll have a yellow card. It'll be waiting on my desk. Hopefully I had the sort of almost the right accented approach, Emily. No, you didn't, Neil. Far from it. Oh, I'm sorry. Anyway, last week with Nick Brandt coming on the show, and by the way, every time I've written Brandt on my laptop, it was auto-corrected to Brandy. I had to be very careful when contacting Nick. He'd have thought, who's this Herbert? Nick Brandy? Doesn't he know my name? But with Nick coming on the show, I thought I'd mention it in the Facebook group and get some feedback, really, on your feelings about, well, what you felt when you first saw Nick's incredibly potent work that he's made in Africa. And there were quite a few comments, but I'll pick a couple out. It's always difficult to do, and I apologise if I haven't picked yours out. But Mark Farrington said, I saw Nick's talk at Photo London in 2019 and managed a short conversation with him afterwards. Very moving work, with a clear artistic progression to his latest work. So many traditional wildlife photographers don't get the activism behind his art. Bravo. I must have put a like on that comment. Leah Murphy commented, I met Nick at a show he had in Santa Fe, New Mexico some years ago. We had a wonderful visit. Very nice, gentle, humble, kind. And his prints, oh my lord, absolutely breathtaking. And John Deakin, his execution, his presentation, the photographs, simply superb. Many really don't understand. Many will rubbish this important work as they do anything else that they don't get or are jealous of. He's made a statement that's made people think again. That's all he wanted to do, and that's been a total success. Yes, I agree with that, John. And actually, John also commented on another post made this week, a post made by a long-time supporter, Jeremy Baker. John said, I wonder how many lives have been saved by the dogs in people's lives during this pandemic. And he was referring to Jeremy's Facebook group post of getting out with a dog to make some pictures. Jeremy wrote, and it was almost like a poem actually, maybe not entirely scanning like one, but you'll get the gist. Nobody ever regrets a walk, but the lead up to it can be difficult. Forcing myself away from my desk, which is easier not to do. Grab the dog's lead, walkies. It seems that every day is Christmas Day for dogs. So happy with the simple things. Maybe a lesson in there somewhere. Fleeting moments of light that November can give, which is good for photography and stemming SAD, which is seasonal affective disorder, in case you didn't know. Or just minimising the loss of one's mojo. Thank you, Jeremy. Brilliant. And you can see more of his Photowalk work on the show page today. Linked to, of course, in your app that you may well be listening to right now. There's some more images of your dog, and I think there was some more from the actual Photowalk, some additional ones from that particular Photowalk. Anyway, you can go and see them on the show page today. And if you'd like to join the group, we'd be absolutely overjoyed to have you there. All you have to do is go to Facebook. Well, we have two Facebook presences really. We have the open page, which usually carries mainly just the episodes, And then, of course, we have the private Facebook group where you can get involved in conversation and become a part of that community. And we have two very precious communities, of course, the Facebook group, and not that it's a competition, but the patrons who, of course, get the extra episode per week on the Saturday, the Diary Show. And they fuel this thing, so you do. Fancy some inspiration? Yes, why not? Okay, what have you got, Neil, this time round? Well, Hayley Sadler from episode 52, talking here about how she went from working behind a desk to becoming a photojournalist. And if today's Photowalk show is partly about why not and can do, then I think this is a pretty good clip for that. It doesn't really detail the complete journey, of course, so it's only a fleeting visit to the episode, but do go take a look at her website, and I'll leave a link to the episode that she featured on as well, which has some powerful stories. But I asked her to chronicle her photographic start, or the beginning of her photographic story, if you will.
Yeah, I love hearing everyone's journeys of how they got into photojournalism or documentary photography, because I feel like it is always a little bit different, and some of us do come from rather unconventional backgrounds. And so for myself, I've been photographing ever since I was 13, and I first had a point and shoot camera and was obsessively taking photos of flowers, actually, back then. So it had always been a hobby and a way that I relaxed, and a way that I saw the world, a way that I engaged in the world. But it had never been a career option in my mind, just because, honestly, I don't know why, it just had never been a career option. And so after I graduated school, I went to work in Congress. I was very interested in politics and international relations and foreign policy, and that seemed like the natural step for me at that time. And I learned a lot, worked with some amazing people, really got to delve into certain policy issues that were very interesting to me. But ultimately, I got to the point where I was learning about all of this and experiencing all of this through a bubble, as I was, sitting behind a desk in a building instead of experiencing it firsthand and learning about it that way. And there were certain voices that I really felt were missing from the conversation, and I wanted to go hear from those voices, from people who were experiencing these things, whose lives have been impacted by these policies or national disasters or conflicts. I wanted to hear those voices and see that for myself. And so it is an unconventional background, but for me, it was actually the jumping off point where I became really interested in these different policy issues, which I now am able to document.
Hayley Sadler, who's a migration expert, photographically that is, based out of DC. I tell you what, this would be a fabulous place to come and do a photo walk on a particularly misty morning. It's like an enchanted forest, so it is. Right, we're joined by our guest Nick Brandt in a moment, and we're going to start in a somewhat non-photographic way because, well, I'll tell you why in a moment. Don't do a spoiler. Do you know, our son came back the other day from watching, our eldest son came back from watching James Bond, the new movie, and I said to him, look, we haven't had a chance to watch this yet, darling. Please do me one favour. As I bought him his tickets online, don't tell me what happens. The first thing he did when he got back home, he said, it's an amazing film, and they told us exactly what happens. I feel like I've seen the film without needing to. Although you're going to say, yeah, you do need to see it, Neil, it's incredible. But I do know what happens. But I'm not going to say anything. From Greg Furman, some of your DMs and your letters. While the topic of your podcast, says Greg, is photography and the experience of photography, you always offer so much more, and this is what I appreciate. But whenever you've mentioned the Garibaldis, I mistakenly assumed that you were talking about chocolates. If you've only just joined us on the photo walk and you're thinking, what's he talking about? Garibaldis? What's a Garibaldi? A Garibaldi is a biscuit. But you thought I was talking about chocolates. And I thought to myself, says Greg, man, this guy really eats a lot of chocolate when he's out and about walking. Oh, well, it seems to work for him. But now I see that your beloved Garibaldis are not chocolates at all. And it looks like I have a new mission to find them here in Wisconsin land. Thank you for your work on both podcasts, and I'll continue to catch up on all the episodes. A photo walk would not be complete now, you know, Greg, without my flask. I've got it here today, and the baldies, as I've shortened them to become known by. Was that correct English? I don't know. This is great. When I was last here, I'm digressing, sorry, you're used to that by now. The ground was just, it wasn't covered in leaves. Now it's just this wash of red leaves. Fantastic. A change of tone entirely now, actually. Matthias Fox, Focks, has been busy for us this week. Well, actually, not necessarily this week, last couple of weeks, making pictures from his walk. And I'm going to make him Patron of the Week. And I'm hoping I'm wrong here, but Matthias, have you been Patron of the Week recently as well? I don't know. I did make a cursory glance, but I was running out the door, and I thought, no, we haven't done that, so he can be this week. But you deserve it, because you've been walking on grounds, making pictures on grounds that carry an extremely haunting story. And I'm probably going to get the collywobbles up me now, walking through what is now, so I'm in a slightly denser woodland here, and I'm not saying that it in any way mirrors exactly what you saw, no, far from it, but I'm imagining all the more. My imagination's playing a big role in, having seen your photographs anyway. Hello, Neil. Last Sunday, I took a photo walk different to my usual ones. I used the new to me Leica M monochrome. What is it about everybody with these Leica M monochromes? I'm feeling a sense of, deep photographic envy. I know that I should be getting over my gas, but it doesn't help me to keep telling me you're buying the monochrome. But anyway, I went to the far west of Germany, near Aachen, to a region called Hergenfeld. I don't know whether you're familiar with the story of this particular area. Well, I must admit, and shamefully, I wasn't. Our history lessons, and I think I covered this the other day, tended to be all about 1066, which, whilst important for English history, I felt that we missed a great deal of modern history. You were only allowed to do modern history if you did it at A level, which is the higher grade at the time. If you're doing history earlier on in your schooling career, it did happen to be, it was all about Harold and an eye, an arrow through the eye in 1066, honestly. But I digress again, because you should know some history here, and he furnishes us with that. In late 1944, says Matthias, US forces entered German soil for the first time and planned to cross the vast woodlands within a couple of days. Instead, the bloodiest and fiercest fights of the European war theatre followed. Between November 1944 and February 1945, nearly 70,000 casualties resulted on both sides. The result of poor planning and intel on the Allied side, and this offensive is still studied in West Point on how not to do it. And also desperate resistance on the German side. In the years after the war, Julius Erasmus, a man from Aachen who lost all his family during the war, recovered and buried the remains of more than 1,600 victims from these woods, which were full of ammunition and unexploded devices. Suddenly I seem to be looking down. In fact, says Matthias, about 150 people died in the years after when collecting firewood and triggering lost grenades and shells. The remains of Robert Carhouse, see my final picture, weren't found until the year 2000. I don't know about you, understanding the British Isles are full of historical places too from this period, but I didn't consider places like this woodland as any landscape. No, I'm sure you wouldn't. That's a woodland scene unlike any other. Well, many others. It feels on photographs, says Matthias, differently. There seems to be a certain mood here. I tried to capture the mood in the photographs. If you consider it appropriate, please share on the show page. Best regards and thank you for your efforts on Matthias. Well, Matt, I am doing exactly that today. I tell you what I'll also do. I'll I'll share an historical film made by an American company that tells the story of that battle. But your pictures in black and white, they certainly did speak to me. And yes, I do believe I feel a sort of a very unnerving silence in the woods in your pictures that you've shared. That sort of this stark black and white. It does make me think again. And of course, we're nearly a week in from Remembrance Sunday, so it seems pertinent to share your pictures in this particular episode. And I'm aware, of course, that in Germany you had Volkstratag, which is it stands for your People's Day of Mourning, doesn't it? Sunday just gone too. So thank you for your pictures. And oh my word, you can see them on the show page today. So, to our guest, delighted to welcome to the show Nick Brandt. Now, you heard my introduction to his work already right at the start of the show, so you get the idea of how important I think Nick is to my understanding of some of the issues he highlights in East Africa. And I had my introduction, actually, to how we impact life on this planet, also heightened when I went to Africa not so long back, but that would be West Africa. And I talk about the Gambia. Oh no, Neil, not another Gambian story. But I did talk about it, but I don't think I've shared the story of the fishing on the west coast. I mean, I saw firsthand how the fishing industry on that stretch of coast, and it goes down further. It's not just a Gambian problem. It has literally been decimated by huge operations where they're sucking fish from the seas to make into fish meal produce, and these factories that they've set up literally just off the coast in one particular town in the Gambia, and it leaves local fishermen fighting for their lives quite literally. And I'll leave a link in the show notes today. The stench, honestly, when I visited, the stench from these fishing plants is a horrible reminder. And I did actually go to make a photo story about it, but I got warned off, which is a story for another time. Anyway, a link to the Guardian piece I found, also an interesting film made by the New Yorker, so you can understand that a bit more. But back to Nick and crossing the continent to East Africa. We recorded our piece, our interview, as COP26 was still ongoing, and nearer to the close than the start, but still ongoing. And I did consider whether to change the introduction slightly now that we know what happened. But no, I thought, no, I'll keep that in. And if anyone is good to talk about the impacts that conference and politicians and generally us make to the environment, it is photographer Nick Brandt, whose work, quoting Wiki for a moment, focuses on the rapidly disappearing natural world as a result of environmental destruction, climate change, and man's actions. Nick, I feel absolutely sure you have one eye on COP26, which as we speak right now is still ongoing. I heard a commentator this morning, and I get angry about this, and I know sometimes you are. It may well be something that you feel in the same way. The last 25 before have been mostly bluff and bluster, and we have our own PM suggesting we're at an 11th hour whilst taking a private jet away from the conference to attend a dinner function at a club in London with his former newspaper editor. And whilst I walk the tightrope of political comment and irony, I do want to ask somebody who sees with his own eyes, for real, and a detailed eye, a set of eyes at that, whether you feel bluff and bluster is being replaced by an actual sense of action.
COP26 and climate change and inaction. I mean, my feeling is that we have already gone past the tipping point. But politicians have to say, we're at the 11th hour, and if we don't act soon, to kind of give people some sense of hope. But we've already passed the tipping point. But that doesn't mean to say we should just give up and do nothing. Surely the point is we should actually just try all the harder, all the more urgently, so that we can mitigate the damaged, save countless billions of human and animal lives in the process. So regarding the bluff and bluster that you mentioned, of course, it drives me crazy as well. We need a million Greta Thunbergs out there screaming from the top of their lungs, and all of us to join in.
It's frustrating that those figuratively screaming at the politicians and those making decisions on our behalf can't find a way to engage together, isn't it, after all this time?
What are you supposed to do when you see the decades-long inaction of politicians and corporate industrialists committing ecocide and what, quite frankly, I would call eco-terrorism? People like Trump, God forbid when he's back, if he's back, when he's back, and Bolsonaro, they're committing a kind of ecocide because through their deliberate suppression of the necessary legislation, they are going to be responsible for the death of ultimately billions of lives. You
live on the side of it sounds idyllic, but what listeners haven't been privy to is our conversation just prior to, as we call it, turning the big red button on, where you yourself have seen very close quarters just how dangerous it is. Your house was almost taken by fire, by the sound of it. We lost a number of buildings, all the land burned. I had a gorgeous oak woodland that's all gone. And everywhere I looked, 360 degrees burned in the 2018 fire. I would have been doing projects about climate change regardless, because it is obviously the single most consequential, important threat facing humankind ever. But yes, seeing this level of destruction, walking over land where finding carcasses of animals, but birds as well, that the birds got killed in the fires. I mean, when you read about the 3 billion animals in the Australian fires and California, which is where I live, Southern California, I really believe that the American West is kind of done. You know, one of the most climate change skeptic parts of the world is America. And you would like to think with the amount of destruction here that it would trigger more action. But I can't remember when I last saw this poll. It was probably a few years ago. But more Americans believed in guardian angels than the science of climate change. Do you lobby politicians yourself?
I wish I could. I don't have that kind of influence or connections. Lobbying, I would probably just, me being me, I'd probably end up just nagging them. Everybody needs to do what they can. So with my photography, I am trying to be, as I've referred to it in the past, this kind of cog, this incremental cog in the wheel of change. Yeah. And there's hopefully a lot of cogs, and some are more influential in who they reach. My fear is that I am mainly preaching to the converted. That if you're looking at my photographs, you already feel similarly about the state of the planet and what is happening to the environment.
Which is not really a comfortable thought, I suppose. But we're not impotent in this as individuals, are we?
I think there's a lot still that people can do through individual change, like stating the obvious, eating plant-based, eating local, eating organic, so we don't have so much of an insect apocalypse through pesticides, driving electric vehicles, not buying one-use plastic. And then that actually does, I would like to think, speak to the corporations, because they then see that there is a profit to be made in products that are more environmentally aware. But it needs all of us to basically, just stop buying fruit in one-use plastic. Just buy the fruit type thing.
A comment, a phrase perhaps I've borrowed from your literature. It's better to be angry and active than angry and passive. Is that a driving force for you now?
Yes, completely. Yeah. I feel these days a permanent state of anger in relation to the political situation, the environmental situation. Being active, it motivates you, it gives you energy and focus, and you feel better. Just purely from a sort of pragmatic, emotional point of view, you feel better because you're being useful, you're being active, you're trying to make a difference. And again, it really doesn't matter how small it is, even if it's just, okay, I'm just not going to buy that product in the store today because it's an obscene amount of plastic.
And I'm shifting uncomfortably with that thought, in that my hand goes up, Nick, knowing full well that I do make use of the grey van with with a smiley arrow bringing my often over-packaged online purchases.
Yeah, and I mean, we're all, I think, slave to the convenience of Amazon to some degree, and I am guilty of that as well. I mean, I try and consolidate stuff into one order because I feel awful when, a van comes up the hill just to drop off one envelope.
I want to talk about some of your photographic projects. I'm not going to do this in any order at all because I'm going to start with The Day May Break and sort of work back a bit. But animal photojournalism and activism photographically and all the different labels that come with it can be a very graphic approach in terms of showing savagery and cruelty. And the shock button seems to have been turned right up to elicit response. But you've never really done that. You've chosen a somewhat different route.
I don't have the courage to photograph animals that I know are going to end up dead after I photograph them. I am in awe of the photographers who can go into slaughterhouses and factory farms and photograph those animals. I need to focus my energies on where animals, they're still alive and will hopefully remain alive.
Do you think one kind of coverage moves people more or perhaps reaches a greater audience in terms of numbers, that is?
National Geographic photographers and photojournalists reach a far greater audience than I do with the more sort of, art world photography that I do. And I kind of struggle with the fact that I wish I could have that same audience that they do. But I think my artistic ego, I have to admit, is such that I feel the need to create on my terms. I can only photograph purely for myself and hope that along the way, if other people are moved and influenced by that work, then great. But I have to be true to myself, and my chosen aesthetic is this kind of work. And in terms of, there's a kind of what people have often commented on is there's a sort of beauty within those photographs. I was watching a new Apple TV series the other day called 1971, the year that music changed everything. Yeah. And they did a section on Marvin Gaye's What's Going On album, which is stunning. And of course, that fantastic, beautiful song, Mercy, Mercy Me, The Ecology, which was one of the first songs dealing with the environment, the state of the planet. Yeah. And the lyrics are great, but the song is just mouth-wateringly beautiful. And so the message is there wrapped up in a thing of beauty. So it's just the way that I work. And I'm not even, like with The Day May Break again, I'm not setting out for the images to be beautiful. I'm never actually setting out for the images to be beautiful. In the instance with The Day May Break, I think actually the fog that was used on location automatically imparted a certain sense of beauty to the imagery. It didn't come from me, it came from just the way the fog drifted around through the frame.
Nick Brandt talking to me today about his incredibly powerful photographic projects made in East Africa. And before we rejoin him, I'd like to tell you a little more about his two most recent projects so that as we hear him talk about them, you can join the dots to form a better picture in your mind of what the work is about as he describes making the pictures. The Day May Break was photographed in Zimbabwe and Kenya in late 2020. It's the first part of a global series portraying both people and animals that have been impacted by environmental degradation and destruction. The photographs were taken at 5 sanctuaries and conservancies. The animals there are almost all long-term rescues as a result of everything from poaching of their parents to habitat destruction to poisoning. The animals featured, they can never be released back into the wild as they wouldn't survive. With their lives now spent within the sanctuaries, they've become habituated to humans. As a result, it was safe for human strangers to be close to the animals, photographed, crucially, in the same frame at the same time. And the fog, Nick mentions, as the website continues to explain, it's a unifying visual. Created by fog machines on location, the fog is also an echo of the suffocating smoke from the wildfires, driven by climate change, devastating so much of our planet. And then this empty world addresses the escalating destruction at the hands of humankind, showing a world where, overwhelmed by runaway development, there's no longer space for the animals to survive. Each image in the series is a combination of two moments in time captured weeks apart, almost all from the exact locked-off camera positions. And this project we'll return to in more detail in part 2 of today's conversation. But returning now to Nick, we talk more about the fog that hangs heavy in the air between the animals and humans in The Day May Break, and the ethereal quality it gives to the photographs within the work.
It was actually something my wife said on day 2 of seeing the photograph. She said, the animals look like they are from the dream of the person in the foreground.
Yes.
Or that it's a childhood memory of an animal long gone. And I thought, yes, that's exactly it. And it was kind of the sort of that stayed in my mind as I photographed.
Occasionally, I'd heard that the animals sometimes would nudge those in the
Yes.
frame with them, and nobody felt threatened at all by that, did they?
No, it was absolutely. Everybody was fabulous. The animals were fabulous. The people were fabulous. The carers, the animal carers, have such a good relationship with these animals that they felt very secure. The animals, so they were calm. The animals were calm and very cooperative. And so the people in the photographs, who've never been close to a giraffe or an elephant before, were in turn so calm because of the confidence of the carers that even if a rhino came over and just sort of bumped with its horn into, say, James, who's sitting there under the light bulb, he didn't even flinch. He didn't even blink. And that happened a few times with other subjects, of the human subjects. They were really wonderfully patient and gracious during the shoot.
I mean, it's extraordinary to see rhino that close.
As the last 2 northern white rhinos on the planet, everybody comes to visit them. And because this was photographed during COVID, I was able to have exclusive use to photograph them for 6 days, which in normal non-COVID times would have been impossible. So it was just an incredible privilege to have such a long period of time with them.
I've mentioned, and we've talked about anger, and I wonder whether a certain amount of sadness pervades your work too, Nick, particularly given the circumstances of this coexistence.
There is a sadness I feel through all the work I do, but also in relation to, in this instance, the people, because they have had their lives ruined by what has happened to them as a result of climate change. But the point is, all these animals and all these people, they are still alive, and therein lies hope and possibility. But the people who, I mean, they lost their farms, their homes, in a couple of cases, even their children swept away in floods from cyclones. These were extraordinary people who were subjected to events that were the responsibility, effectively, of much wealthier countries far away that are, responsible for climate change, which is sadly the people who are most impacted, the rural poor in third world countries, and now indeed in first world countries, are those who are going to be, the most impacted.
I saw you speak where you liken working with a portrait of an animal as you would a human, which I found fascinating. You abide to rules such as respect of not photographing an animal with its mouth open. Is that the way you feel? Because these are clearly portraits of animals that you make.
I don't see the difference between photographing a human and an animal. It's exactly the same to me. So just as you wouldn't really take a portrait of a human being with their mouth hanging open, I've got no interest in doing the same with an animal. If you look at these photographs in The Day May Break, hopefully it appears that there's a similar emotional state of both human and animal, that there's a shared sense of, and I'm really not trying to anthropomorphize here. I'm not imposing this notion on the animal. I'm just saying the quality in the photograph is a sort of shared sense of melancholy and loss. I'm not saying the animal's feeling that, of course not. Yet I'm always looking for that moment with an animal that it appears to be posing for its portrait, just as a human would in a studio. And it's why I think so many of the photographs kind of have almost like a 19th century photographic studio quality to it.
Honestly, we've had some had some very important photographers on the show in terms of what they've introduced us to as a viewing public. But I'm so pleased this week to have Nick here, Nick Brandt. I really am. And part 2 is coming up shortly. A mention for some future guests at this point in the new year. We are going on an actual photo walk with a legendary landscape photographer, Charlie Waite. So it'll be you and me and Charlie walking together. There's an MPB special on the way, and whilst I was in Brighton recording that, I took the opportunity to talk to one photographer and one printer who have so inspired me. Magnum's Mark Power, who talks about his new book, which shows a somewhat different side to Guernsey than the regular postcard travel book sort of pictures. And he reveals some truths to me about the landmark work, The Shipping Forecast. And then I've been waiting for so long to talk with a printer who's printed for photography's royalty, as I term them. Mentioned already, I know, Robin Bell. So lots to come, lots to look forward to, including, and this has been a few months coming with a handful of mentions, I know, whilst the idea was beginning to form properly, the Photowalk retreat. It is finally booked. Well, the venue's booked. Right now it's a quiet, beautiful house. Well, actually, it was a former dairy, that's waiting for us from Sunday the 6th of February in the new year. And I'd like to fill it with the sound of photo walkers. Cue the song. So let me tell you what's planned, so you get a proper picture, pun fully intended, of what will be happening on the first Photo Walk retreat. The first one is British, but it does not mean that you can't attend if you're from Europe or even further. It probably makes it harder in these times. But the first one is going to be hosted in the UK. It's on the Isle of Wight in the Dairy, where the Photo Walk show was a few weeks back. I do have plans for Europe and America. Clearly some things that were not things 2 years ago, i.e. travel restrictions and obstacles that, thank you to COVID. They probably need to relax a tad before those trips can be a reality. But for the moment, yes, it's for the moment, it's on the Isle of Wight, which is a wonderful island at the foot of the UK. You get to it by ferry, and there are parts which frankly feel like they're in a place time, well, not time forgot, but decided to get around to gradually. Perfect, I thought, for a retreat. And it starts with, the opportunity to arrive on either the 6th, Sunday the 6th, or Monday the 7th of February, which are both what I'm calling rest days, where you can explore under your own steam, or you can spend some time drinking coffee, being in our Photo Walk library and just chatting about photography and so on. The activity parts of the week are Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday, with a farewell brekkie on the Friday. But what is the difference, I'm hearing you ask, or if you haven't, I'm expecting you to. What is the difference, Neil, between a retreat and a workshop? Well, I shall tell you. And this is an important point, because you're not so much being instructed like a workshop, sitting there listening, taking notes, but being guided. And it's as important that you feel this is the retreat that you need away from the noise of social media, the everyday world shouting, "Look at me!" But also feel that during this time that you can flourish, and you can learn, and you can be inspired by those that you're sharing your time with, photographically and mentally. So there'll be 3 activities across the 3 days that aren't the rest, the travel and the holiday days, and they are, there's a documentary day, making pictures with somebody like a dairy farmer to bring out your inner James Revilius, maybe, and also the challenge to make one street portrait and bring back a story about that particular person. Now, it shouldn't feel like a test, and you may fare better at some things than others, but the idea we're all making the same journey on that day with a wonderful good food treat at the end of the day to debrief is the Well, it is the entire, with a small e, exercise. And then there's a sound day, understanding the power of sound for our pictures. I want to introduce you to the wonder of sound, the potency of it, and how precious that it can be. And that day we're actually going to go and make an edition of the Photowalk show together. So yes, you're going to help present the show. Did I mention a good food treat at the end? Yes, I did, or I did before, and it's the same on that day. And then it would not be a Photowalk retreat without a Photowalk. Of course, there are several locations that we'll be considering. Frankly, we're spoiled for choice. There's the Needles, which is the famous lighthouse location on the western point of the island, with it's a fantastic place to make pictures and head out on a walk. But equally, I have a fascination personally for seaside towns that close in the winter for a glorious black and white story. So I think we'll end up doing both. And equally, the farm that we're staying on has its own private woodland, and we'll certainly be making use of that. And then, yes, I'll be setting up this photo book library at our base on the mezzanine level, a place to start and end the day with coffee, Garibaldi's, or something a little stronger, if that's the best way for you to prep or relax. So yes, there's some learning. Yes, there's photography. And yes, there's photo walking. And yes, this wind's getting up, as you can probably hear. Yes, there's sound. But most of all, this is a place for like-minded lovers of photography to be immersed in it, without the call of the outside world saying, "Look at me!" And that's why it's a retreat. My aim, well, that you come away with inspiration, some new skills, or a belief, if you will, some new friends, and you know what? A good few days on a great breakaway altogether. And when you consider how long you'll be with us, I think the holiday aspect of it is important as well. So, patrons, expect your invite over the coming days, after which we'll open up perhaps a little more. Max numbers, as we can also have the amazing granary building that's next door to the dairy as well, between 5 and 10 people. So it's really quite intimate. We'll have plenty of time together. More news anon. Right, here's a mail from Dan O'Reilly, proving that we have a good age range for those that think photography's new talent are only listening to the kind of shows that teach you how to make a fast buck. So welcome aboard, Dan, and I'll share your pictures today on the show page. Hi Neil, I started listening to your podcast a few weeks ago and I absolutely love it, and I'm now working backwards to hear all the episodes. I love the photo walks and your audio is sublime. There truly is not a podcast like it. Dan, my British self is of course shifting uncomfortably with all the compliments, though I am smiling through the flattery, so thank you really. I thought, Dan said, I'd tell you a little about myself and send in some photos I took while listening. I'm 18, from Whitstable in Kent. Oh, love Whitstable. Lots of happy memories. I'm going to UCA to do a foundation. I'm currently going to UCA to do a foundation year so that I can go to university to study photography next year. I was never too artistic when I was younger, but I was always very competitive. And so when I saw a friend of mine start doing photography and taking great photos, it spurred me on to start, and I fell in love with it. I feel with artistic careers, there can be a level of doubt as I see all my friends going off to study humanities and sciences, and I often wonder if I made the right decision. But when I hear that it's time to take my lens caps off on a photo walk, I'm always happy and excited with the path that I've chosen. Slow down on me now, Dan. I'm feeling responsibility for you all of a sudden. All your guests and all the patrons, incredible work shown in the notes and on the 365 astound me, but I rarely hear of a younger listener sending you one of these, so here goes. My portfolio is Dan O'Reilly, O'Reilly with 2 L's, .myportfolio.com, and my Instagram is dan.o'reilly. I tell you what, I'll leave a link on the show page as ever. It's probably much easier to connect and see what Dan's work is via the show notes, which you'll find via the app, of course. I'm really a beginner compared to all the amazing people in the community, but I hope that I can use all these amazing photographers' work to grow. Attached are 3 photos I took while listening to the podcast on 2 separate days. The cow picture was nothing special. Oh, Dan, you do yourself down. But the silhouettes at sunset I took after looking at Valerie Jardin's Instagram, and the portrait of the lady was the first time I've ever asked a stranger for a portrait. And while my nerves maybe got the better of me and I underexposed and slightly missed the focus, I'm very happy with the picture. And so you should be. So thank you again for your wonderful podcast, and I hope you're doing well. Kind regards, Dan O'Reilly. Oh, Daniel O'Reilly. Do I call you Dan or Daniel? I don't want to sound like I'm telling you off. Dan, all your links are on the show page today, as I said, and it'd be super if you're listening, if you can give Dan some. If you're listening, of course you're listening. That's what you're doing now. If you can give Dan some of your wisdom, because we have some amazingly talented and inspiring photographers with much experience to boot between you all as well. So the pictures, as I say, they're on the show page today, and if you can leave Dan some thoughts, some comments, some inspiring thoughts, then that would be fantastic. And I will say, Dan, you should definitely hold on to that. Well, get it printed. Number 1, get that picture printed. The first street portrait that you asked somebody for. I think it's what I refer to as a pivotal photograph in your photographic career. It is the one from which you were able to ask more people for their pictures in the future. So it's by definition, not by virtue, by definition, the most important. Right, inspiration. Well, it has to come from, it's a photographer I spoke to a little while back, actually, called Anna Hardy, who'd been a teacher, but really wanted to be a photographer. So Dan, as you come at this with your wonderfully new and fresh experience and eyes, which I think is a complete bonus, I think you'll enjoy hearing Anna talking about how going in without really a firm direction, which I think can be a fantastic approach path, and unless you're flying an airliner, I suppose, was actually good for her. It was a twist and turns learning path that's led her to being a portrait photographer and an educator for so many new aspiring photographers now. This is Anna Hardy.
I was completely rudderless, and I kind of, all I knew is that I just wanted to take photos. And actually I remember just not really knowing kind of how or where I could do it, and having a very sort of like machine gun approach to it of like, well, I'll just shoot everything. Yeah. And I remember going to like a real sort of there was it was like a portfolio review for really kind of sort of like fine art photographers in London, and I kind of just took these really terrible pictures down. But now I look back and I think, oh my God, I can't believe I actually did that. And I mean, they very politely told me, I don't think you're quite there yet. And I was like, oh, okay. But they also said, hardly any photographers can actually make a living from just, and by fine art photography, I don't mean kind of, I know now often people talk about like fine art wedding photography, but I mean like as in sort of, selling pieces, individual pieces, or, for book covers or things like that. And a lot, they sort of said, most people have another type of photography that they make that they pay the bills with whilst producing, individual images, if you like, for consumption. So then I thought, okay, right, I need to rethink this. What kind of photography should I do? And I always knew I wanted to photograph people. That was never in question. I never sort of wondered about product photography or landscape photography or anything like that. It was always people that I was really fascinated with photographing. But yeah, and I guess I went initially for weddings, probably, if I'm being honest, because I thought that was my best chance at making a living from it. I've never been someone who's been like, oh, I love weddings. I grew to really love weddings. Through shooting them, I really fell in love with them, but I didn't kind of think, I love weddings, I need to work with them. That wasn't my motivation. It was working with people and trying to make a living as a photographer.
That's Anna Hardy. Right, I don't think I've made many pictures today, have I? I've been chortling along to you and with you, and I've not really made a lot of pictures today. I'm going to have to do what my dad said. You're going to have to get a shovey on, son. Otherwise, you're not going to have anything to show on, your sketchbook pictures to show for your photo walk today. Well, I'm going to do that thing that we talk about so often. I'm just going to look up, take a picture of the canopies, which is great because they're still being kissed by the sunlight just above them. So let me throw some letters on the floor for a second, and I'm going to look up. Just need to find somewhere. Where shall I? Oh, here we are. This is a magnificent tree reaching high above me. So I'm going to have to... Oh, I can smell dog on my hands. Just a moment ago, these dogs came out of nowhere, and they took a real interest to the microphone. I think they thought it was a small rat on the end of my hand or something. But so I'm wrestling the microphone off them. But right, okay, I can smell dog looking up into the air. So we've got 500th, ISO 400. I've had to open up quite a lot more now, 2.8, just because it's getting a bit darker now. And those nights are sort of coming in. I remember last year doing a photo walk, literally the light. Do you remember that one where the light was had practically died and I had no idea where I was, and I was in the dark, and of course I used the phone as my microphone with a reporter app, and I had no light because of course I was using the phone as my microphone. We're back with Nick Brandt in a moment, and I've been floored by a notification, and I'll do that, a notification that I saw on my phone, which was what I was looking at when I mentioned those dogs a moment ago. But I'll do this at the end of the show, something I want to share with you. Quite a few new listeners to mention this week. Here's one from Ollie Barker-Jones. Hey Neil, only recently discovered your podcast whilst on a photo walk through London, and just wanted to thank you for the incredible, thought-provoking and insightful content that you release. Genuinely, I look forward to every episode. Your work has inspired me to get out and try new things, ask people for portraits, and finally just shoot from the heart instead of shooting for the likes. Oh, we talked a lot about that last week, didn't we? Although, in fact, maybe not last week, but certainly over the last month, we've addressed that topic of shooting for likes. As a somewhat anxious and introverted individual, it's always interesting hearing from like-minded guests, learning how they work and checking out their work. So thanks again. Look forward to the next episode from Ollie. And his Instagram is @OllieBarkerJ. And I'll put a link on the show page today so you can go and see Ollie's work. But you have to promise me now, Ollie, to send me some of your photo walk pictures. Love the Insta, by the way. It's an eclectic collection of life. Isn't that what Instagram should be about? Dare I mention the C word? And I don't mean the nasty virus, no. Can we talk Christmas, just for a second? Christmas gifts. As we approach, I know not everybody celebrates Christmas listening, but if you do, if it's a celebration that rings true in your life, then I'd be interested to know what you're buying for other photographers in your life. I'm aware that probably you're being bought the gifts, but there's bound to be a few of you out there that do actually buy for other photographers. So I'd like to know what you're buying. It's a time of year for my photographer friends. I'm always a bit stuck, to be honest. I think, well, you must have that book or you must have that gizmo. And short of buying them a Leica monochrome, which I'm afraid my budget stretches nowhere near, I'm not quite sure what to suggest or buy sometimes. But I love this, and it will be on the show page today. This is not so much a Prezi, but how to wrap a Prezi for the photographer in your life. From one of our patrons, Helen Fennell. Neil, I thought this would make you smile. My husband bought me a present of some photo gear and wrapped it in medium format film backing paper. That is inspired, Helen. I'm going to pop that on the show page so you can see it. Full marks to Mr. Fennell. But Helen, What is under the wrapping? I mean, you've teased us with a picture of your wrapped Prezi, but we don't know what's within. So there'll have to be a second part to this now, Helen. You need to let me know what the Prezi was. Right, part 2 of our guest, Nick Brandt. Now, it's a slightly longer second part, but it does get a little personal toward the close. But don't worry, Nick, if you're listening, it's not that bit that was removed. Nudge, nudge. I don't want you squirming or sitting uncomfortably for the next 15, 20 minutes, or I certainly don't want you getting in trouble at home either. But near the start of today's show, we had a Facebook group message from Mark Farrington, who said, I saw Nick's talk at Photo London in 2019 and managed a short conversation with him afterwards. Very moving work with a clear artistic progression to his latest work. So many traditional wildlife photographers don't get the activism behind his art, and that's what we talked about for a moment, wasn't it? Or at least that's what I read from Mark. And that's a very good position from which to enter part 2, really, because Nick has not just put his heart and soul into the projects that he makes photographically, and the heart and soul, such a very empty, easy cliche, afforded something usually, isn't it? But in Nick's case, it's the full meaning of those words. Honestly, it is, because he's also worked tirelessly to help create a foundation. So when Mark, just a moment ago with those words, talks about activism, this is the very inspiration, I think, behind Nick Brandt's approach.
Tell me about the Big Life Foundation. It's had a profound effect on the ground in Africa, an extraordinary effect in particular when it comes to the levels of poaching, for starters.
Yeah, so I co-founded Big Life Foundation in 2010, which for listeners is an area in East Africa, the Amboseli-Tsavo-Kilimanjaro ecosystem between Kenya and Tanzania. And at the time, poaching was completely out of control of not just elephants, but all animals. And there were very few organizations in the area, non-profits, with enough money. And the governmental organization, Kenya Wildlife Service, didn't have enough money to do much either. So because I was fortunate enough to have wealthy collectors of my photographs, I was able to go to a few and raise enough funds to hire rangers, buy land cruisers, build outposts with Richard Bonham, who's the person in Kenya who runs everything. And in very short order, start arresting poachers who had been poaching with impunity for years, if not decades.
Wow. And
now, 10 years later, there are 300 plus rangers across 1.6 million acres of ecosystem. There are about 40 outposts. Big Life employs over 500 people, one of the biggest employers in the area. And with that has come not just almost entire annihilation of poaching in that area, but an increase in population of most species like elephant, giraffe, lion, cheetah.
Fantastic.
But there are huge challenges. The poaching has been sort of solved, but of course it's still going on in the areas around that area that we protect. But now actually the far bigger, more consequential, monumental issue is land subdivision, which sounds really boring, but it's not, because what's happening is the ecosystem is shattering into thousands of pieces as land that was formerly communal for everybody to graze their livestock and for the animals to wander. It's now being privatized into 40-acre lots, and the local people are selling it off. And so the ecosystem is shattering, as I've said. And now we're in this race against time to raise funds to save what land we can, to lease it for wildlife corridors, migratory corridors, before it's all just gobbled up, fenced off, and turned into what will ultimately be rather unproductive farmland, because it's too dry there.
And whilst this is happening, we have had and still have the pandemic. How much difference is that making across the region when it comes to the work you can do and the life and the livelihoods of those living in the wake of it?
So it made a lot of difference in the negative, by which I mean a lot of people in tourism lost their jobs.
Yeah.
And these are in poor areas. So how are they going to survive? And there's all the other people that are sort of tangential to those working in tourism. in those unprotected areas, poaching has gone through the roof.
Yeah.
Because, say, for example, in Kenya, tourism was the second leading sector of the economy, and that collapsed. And just to be clear, once these people no longer have employment, and we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people across East Africa who've lost their jobs, they have to eat. So bushmeat poaching becomes a means of survival. And you can't kind of criminalize people for just trying to find a way of feeding their families. What is criminal is when there are poaching gangs who come in and overnight will round up and kill about 100 zebras and take them to the markets in towns. And that is pure profit, pure greed. Very different to somebody struggling to feed their family. But the land subdivision has also that's got nothing to do with the pandemic. That has just been rip-roaring along at terrifying pace.
Yeah. And what about the work of NGOs? Has that been harder too?
2020 was a surprisingly good year because I think people understood that there was a crisis that was faced, and people really were generous and donated to all manner of organizations. Yeah. 2021, we have noticed a kind of perhaps what can be best described as empathy fatigue or compassion fatigue. Donations are way, way down for not just us, but a number of organizations we've spoken to. And I also think as people stop traveling far afield to places they've normally been, they feel less emotional engagement to those non-profit organizations they were donating to 6,000 miles away. So, yeah, our donations, Big Life's donations, are way down this year for the first time ever, actually. So that's very worrying.
I want to talk about Inherit the Dust. It's a show that left a real lasting impression upon me. I remember seeing the photographs at Photo London, which would have been 2016, and I remember seeing it with a friend, a former army photographer, with, for context, experience of conflict when it truly gets ugly. His pictures, certainly his archive, when he's shared it with me, have and do leave me quite often shy of finding the right words to unpick what he's seen. But there are only 2 times in my life that I've witnessed him speechless. Once more recently when we watched The Joker, which I think for many was as much a psychological experience as a cinematic one, and then Inherit the Dust. Now, I remember him during the show as he stood before the photographs, and then our hushed pilgrimage home from the city to our houses in Berkshire. And I would explain the concept of that extraordinary work, but for the fact that I have you on the end of this line, and the privilege of having you to do it is just too good to pass over. How did you come up with this incredible idea to make life-sized pictures of animals and then place them, and this is where I'll let you take over, in the most incredibly potent and, well, frankly, heartbreaking locations?
Well, I'm really flattered to hear about your friend's reaction. That is always very gratifying when you hear that people are that moved by still imagery. And just to get onto that for a second is, moving film can so much more easily move people because you've got moving pictures and you've got music, and we rely just on a still image.
Yeah.
So I'm really flattered when I hear that a photograph has had, or a series of photographs have had that kind of impact. To answer your question, my earlier work was kind of a sort of melancholic elegy to a world that was disappearing. But as I saw the increasing pace at which the natural world was being gobbled up and destroyed, I just felt I needed to deal with that more directly. When you're driving through these places, and you drive through East African countryside, and only a couple of years earlier, or a few years earlier, you would have seen giraffes and zebras and impalas.
Yeah.
And now there's nothing. They've all been killed for bushmeat. And I've always been fascinated as another sort of tangent on that is where you are right now. You're in Berkshire, right?
Yeah.
So where you are in Berkshire right now, what was there? What animals were there 500 years ago? What animals were there 5,000 years ago? And there would have been all these extraordinary animals like saber-toothed tiger and woolly mammoth, 10,000 years ago. And those animals are long gone. They were destroyed, mainly by humans. But meanwhile, in a diminishing number of places in Africa, animals as extraordinary still exist.
Yeah.
That was kind of the genesis for it. The idea to use unreleased portraits that I had taken of animals in prior years and print them life-size and erect those panels of those photographs in places where animals just like those used to roam, but due to human influence no longer do. But it was also very important that the people in the photographs not be seen as the aggressors, because again, something I've already mentioned is that environmental degradation most frequently impacts the poor. Just like, the photograph Wasteland with Elephant or Wasteland with Rhinos, these giant dump sites where the portraits of the animals are there in those landscapes, but included are people who are living really tough, impoverished lives, struggling to survive in a very environmentally degraded world.
I know a part of you screams inside when you hear or have to face questions from those who suggest you did or simply could have photoshopped the panels of life-sized animals into these scenes after, but tell me why it was so important to present this as one authentic scene, photographed together in real time.
The photography was basically a kind of, I think of it as street photography,
right?
Which may sound odd. It's kind of land art meets street photography. Yes, we put these giant panels in those places, but then I just wanted to wait for the people who live there in those places to be oblivious to those animal portraits. They're just like ghosts in the landscape.
Yes.
And so that it just feels hopefully very real. And that is the case. I mean, with the sole exception of photograph Underpass with Elephants, where there's a little kid looking at the panel, the people in the photographs are just getting on with their lives. And I think that kind of almost street photography feel gives the photographs more integrity.
And it works because you couldn't say really that those in the photograph, the people were necessarily very camera aware.
No, I mean, I don't. They really weren't that interested, and especially after a few hours or more, usually a few days, because I would wait days and days for cloud cover. They're just not interested. They've got all their own stuff to deal with.
Well, you banned your crew from making behind-the-scenes images of how it was all done. Fortunately, as so often is the case, the memo didn't seem to properly reach everyone, and actually not you either, because fortunately we have that amazing short film that you made of how it was done. And
yes, done. Photos taken secretly by my assistant, and apparently, as you say, taken secretly by me as well.
By you, yeah.
I've learned my lesson that in this day and age of Photoshop, you have to document. You can hear the weary sigh in my voice. You have to document everything to prove to those skeptics out there that, no, we shot this for real. No, we didn't do it in Photoshop. It is as you mentioned, a constant source of frustration for me that people just assume it's Photoshop. And by the way, it's a lot easier doing it for real. It not only looks better, there's more, organic integrity to the work. It's also a lot easier than trying to kind of cobble something together afterwards. And in addition, stuff happens.
Yeah.
Serendipity.
Yeah.
That is far, far better than anything you could have come up with in your imagination.
And also, you did make it a lot harder on yourself, 3,000 miles away, as you said in that film, from the nearest lab to process or print. I would imagine that was quite stressful.
Oh, it got worse. I actually didn't mention this part in the book, so this is a first. So I was having the film processed in London every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And getting the contact sheets, and everything seemed fine. It all looked correctly exposed, and yep, all good. I get home to California.
Yeah.
And my two Mamiya RZ67s, because I had three. The first brand new one broke down within 10 days. So then I switched to the two ones bought on eBay because they stopped making new ones. Both those eBay cameras, both of which had been checked and serviced prior to flying, had mirrors that were messed up and caused the 6x7 negatives to vibrate a little on most frames. So it was only when I started scanning the negatives that I discovered that kind of 3/4 of the photographs had vibration and were unusable. And I was obviously mortified.
Yeah.
If I'd been shooting digital, I would have discovered this within minutes. But I didn't discover this on a was it a 6-week shoot or an 8-week shoot? Can't remember. I think it may have been an 8-week shoot. And I just sort of lay in bed in a fetal ball for a few days, just thinking, that's it. I've got no money left and I can't go through this all over again. And then I just thought, I don't have a choice. I have to go back. And I went back for 3 weeks and spent a bucket load of money again. And that is kind of what the body of work that you now see, because going a second round was better, because I'd ironed out a lot of the things I'd not done as well as I could have on the first go round, and again, this is one clear advantage of digital, is you can see what technical disasters may be in waiting right at the outset.
Actually, I was under the illusion that you still shoot film, but you don't. You've rethought your position on digital.
What I've learned is to never say never again. And I said, I will never shoot digital. And then I said, I will never shoot anything other than with film when shooting black and white. Yes. And now with the last 2 projects I've done, I've shot color, which I said I would never do. I've shot digital, which I've said I'd never do. And now with The Day May Break, I've shot black and white and digital, which I said I'd never do. So basically, I can't be trusted. The reasons were of practical necessity. Just to start with The Day May Break, I actually was going to take film cameras and digital, but because of that constantly shifting fog, it's just too risky, because with the wind blowing, every single frame is fundamentally different.
Yeah.
So you can think you've got a great shot, but then you kind of look at it afterwards and there's a big blob of fog over somebody's face. Well, that's no good.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't necessarily caught it in the moment. So that was digital. And then, of course, This Empty World, first time I've shot color, first time I've used lights. And it was the first time I had to do digital, because we were on location for 5 months, and 3 of which were just waiting for 10 cameras placed across the ecosystem to capture animals on camera, that the photographs would be taken by motion sensors.
Yes.
So, and each night those photographs would hopefully occur, and each morning we would download them from the 10 cameras across via intranet across the ecosystem and see what we had. Couldn't have done that with film. And then, of course, the cameras were always locked off, so that once we had sufficient number of shots, then with the camera remaining locked off throughout, we would then build the set and photograph the people part of those photos.
And it wouldn't have really... I look at the photos and I think, well, certainly the bus station with the elephant and the red bus. I mean, we're talking... colour was absolutely essential for this project, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah. And that's why I did it. I mean, most of my favourite photographers are black and white. And I've always been... That's my natural aesthetic gravitation.
Yes.
But with this, it absolutely had to be colour, because you want to see these animals photographed in light that belongs not to their natural world, but to this kind of grimy, industrial, modern human world. So that can only work in color with the red lights of taillights and the sodium orange of construction lights and the fluorescent light of petrol stations and the these colors that come out of the buses. And also what was exciting for me was I had never seen anybody photograph animals in that kind of way, with that kind of completely human, unnatural light.
And it's very theatrical. I mean, The Gathering, for example, with the elephant looking up towards those.
Oh, So that photograph, to describe
picture.
It to listeners. I mean, I always wonder just how frustrating it must be for people to be listening to a podcast. They can't see the photos.
I'm going to link so people can, of course.
Yes. So that photograph, so the elephant was photographed first. And when I saw it, I kind of gasped, because it looks to me like the elephant has placed its head on the shelf of this trench as if to be executed.
Yes.
And these trenches, I mean, having in prior years always photographed animals at low angles to frame them against sky, to give them a sense of dignity and power.
Yeah.
Now I was photographing animals down in trenches to make them feel like they were being swallowed up by the tide of progress, that humankind is sweeping along on level ground and they are now almost in their graves. So here's this elephant with its head on the this ledge, appearing to be about to be guillotined. And then I brought in that semicircle of people and photographed them separately. Obviously using the same lights. All these photographs were done using the same light from the same camera position. Most of the photographs, again, in that series, people were left at their own devices. I hate, and this applies to, we didn't talk about this till the day may break, but pretty much all my photography of people, the people are kind of left to themselves. I really don't like directing people. Right. I don't like posing them. I find that what they do is generally going to be much more interesting. Yes, I ask a guy to go and sit at the top of a ladder. Yes, I ask somebody to lie down. But then I just kind of leave them to find the positions that they feel comfortable in. Now, there are exceptions to that, like The Gathering, where it appears those people, are they praying? Or are they mourning?
Yeah, their heads are bowed.
Their heads are bowed, their hands are placed. And you can take either interpretation, and I'm happy with whichever interpretation you take. But that's kind of in the minority of photographs where I have actually asked people to do specific things. Generally, I just sort of, as I say, I leave people alone.
How attached do you get to the animals, Nick? And this is a loaded question in some respects.
Well, I mean, okay, again, we need to take The Day May Break because that's the most recent project.
Yeah.
I have found myself attached to both the animals and the people.
Yeah.
In those photographs, because we spent quite a fair amount of time with them. The way that I worked on The Day May Break was, it was kind of like photographic jazz for me after the last bodies of work, by which I mean I really embraced spontaneity. I would walk out each morning only knowing what animal I was going to photograph because of which sanctuary we were at. And I would always have a core group of about 12 people. And I would just experiment with who worked with what animal. And it was an expensive way of doing it, but it just meant I always had these 12 people that I could just sort of work through, which meant they were with us for quite a long time, often as long as 10 days. Yeah. And they've all got these terrible stories. And I kind of got home and, they got paid, but I just thought, Jesus, they've gone back to these displacement camps where their homes were washed away and cyclones, where they're now working as manual laborers in towns displaced from the homes that they once lived in, with the farms that they had. And they're living, really messed up lives. So, and I felt really uncomfortable about this. And so a percentage of the proceeds from the sales of the photographs are going to the 24 people in the final selected photographs. And then with the animals, I hope that the sort of exposure to those sanctuaries increases donations to some degree for them.
And one of the reasons I mentioned that really, Nick, was that Kumquat the elephant, I know this is in Inherit the Dust, isn't it, was slain by poachers just days after, I think literally
24 hours. I think it was 24 hours
after you photographed her. Yeah.
And that poacher got caught, by the way. That was the last multiple killing of elephants in Amboseli ecosystem under Big Life's watch. That elephant, Kumquat, was a gorgeous elephant, and she had a daughter and a granddaughter, and most of the family was slain by that poaching gang.
Are you still surprised by what you see? Do animals still delightfully surprise you?
I can watch any animal for hours completely enraptured. Yeah. It doesn't have to be an elephant, which of course is amazing, especially when you see things like I've seen elephant births or elephant births singular. But I'm really fascinated by just watching one of my dogs snurfling around the garden. When I go scuba diving, which is my favorite external activity of all over safaris, I am very happy just to sort of drop down to 30 meters and spend my entire dive staring into the eyes of a potato grouper.
Wow.
I love it. I don't know what else to say. It just moves me so much because I see animals as sentient creatures, no different from us. And I wish animals could speak human, because then a lot of the appalling prejudice and murder and behavior towards animals would vanish overnight. When people understood that animals are not, as Descartes appallingly described in the 17th century, or was it the 18th century, emotionless machines. I mean, how any dog owner on the planet would tell you, my dog is not an emotionless machine. My dog, I mean, with my dog, and I'm not kind of projecting, but one of my dogs, I just have to think about it's time to go for a walk. And she picks up on it. She'll just she'll sit up, and it's like, because my energy has changed. She's so instinctually intelligent in terms of picking up on energy.
There is a picture at the end of Across the Ravaged Land which are elephant footprints.
Yep.
I assume, Nick, just finally, you'll be following the footprints of animals like this until the day you're physically unable to lift a camera anymore.
I consider it my mission in life to express my feelings about the disappearance and destruction of the natural world for both animals and humans. With climate change, that's why I absolutely had to bring humans into the literal foreground for the first time, because we are all being fundamentally impacted by what humans have done to this planet. And that is not going to end. The destruction is not going to end anytime soon. So I fully expect to go to my deathbed angry, but hopefully also active.
The wonderful Nick Brandt. Oh, what an honour, truly. And I sincerely hope that we'll be talking to Nick Brandt again in the future on this podcast. I'll let you into a slight secret. I took this Friday photo walk on the Wednesday just gone, and there's a reason I'm telling you that. There's a contextual reason, really. The show does take 2, sometimes more days to piece together. So even though sometimes I manage a Thursday with an evening to almost all-nighter to edit, most times it is a Wednesday. But the reason for telling you this is that at the time of recording, I received some news, and the way I'm ending the show today is not the way that I planned at all. I sat down on a stump in these woods that I've walked a few times now, Penwood, and I had a rethink about how to close today after a notification popped up from a wonderful photographer who's appeared on the show before, called Jack Lowe do you remember Jack Lowe from the Lifeboat Station Project? His notification on Twitter simply said, reeling from the news that the great photographer Tom Stoddart has died. I had the privilege of making prints for him in a previous chapter. I loved our chats and lunches together, but we haven't seen each other for years, and I regret that now. Rest in peace, Tom, you clever chap. And then he placed a picture of do you remember the image, if you're aware of Tom's work, which I'm sure there can't be many people that aren't, but of that exceptionally proud woman in Sarajevo in her business fineries, walking by a line of sandbags with a soldier foreground, the very picture of resistance to, at the time, a hideous war. It's certainly one of Tom's signature images. So yeah, Tom Stoddart has passed away, which I think is incredibly sad news for the world and for the photographic world. And I don't have the wonderful experiences of those lunches that Jack talks of, but I do have my own experience of Tom, who undoubtedly is one of the most important photojournalists, certainly photojournalists that the UK has had, but his impact on photography around the world has surely been felt as well. And his book Eyewitness and his more recent one featuring extraordinary women are 2 books that I'm so proud to have on my bookshelf. But I'd like to just briefly share my own personal experience of Tom and how genuine and how kind and generous he was as a man and a photographer. I got introduced to Tom by my good friend Giles. I know I've mentioned Giles already once today, but Giles will surely appreciate the reason for mentioning him at this moment, because it was he that said you should contact Tom Stoddart and have a chat on your podcast. And this was going back actually quite a while, when this very fledgling show well, it took a break for a while, but it first appeared as a program called Breathe Pictures. And Tom was one of the first to be interviewed on that particular program, and that was because Giles had introduced me to him. So I called, I emailed Tom, and actually he phoned me back and graciously agreed to an interview. Now I knew of Tom, particularly through one particular image that I've mentioned before, which was the I suppose gruesome picture is how I can describe it, of the Lockerbie Pan Am 747, the Lockerbie disaster, the Pan Am 747, lying on its side in a field, and that's a particular image that has always remained with me. I remember it, seeing that as a picture on the front of a newspaper. So I was very aware of Tom's work and indeed his stature as a powerhouse of photojournalism internationally. But so I said, look, I'd be delighted to. He invited me to come and interview him, and I said I'd be delighted to. And we agreed to meet in Newcastle, in the northeast of the UK and England. And I asked him. I said, "Can you suggest a hotel nearby that perhaps I can put my head down for a couple of nights?" He said, "Oh, don't worry about that. Come and stay with me." And so I did, and spent 2 glorious days talking with him and asking him questions and just listening to his fantastical stories. Some of them not easy to listen to, no. And some of the work that he's done, a lot of the work that he's done around the world to bring news of current affairs it's astonishing and moving, and sometimes difficult to look at, for sure. But subsequently, every time I've reached out to chat, he would always have the time. He always had the ability to wryly smile at progress while sharing stories of what life was like as a documentary photographer. And his name is often mentioned alongside the greats like Don McCullin, and the two of them were actually friends. So yeah, they shared. There's a fantastic picture actually. Note to self: pop this on the show page today that he made of Don McCullin, but not. It's a portrait. Well, it's a portrait of McCullin, but also not all at the same time. I'll pop that on the show page today. So yeah, I've changed the end of the show today, so I can play some thoughts from Tom, some words and inspiration that he's shared with me, and by extension you, during the interviews that he's given. And I'm going to take a couple of songs from a musician I love called Hans Johnson. They both have an African feel, and I think fit both our guests today, Nick Brandt, for his work in Africa, and I'm sure Nick won't mind. Specifically, I'm now thinking of the late Tom Stoddart, whose own work in Africa, covering the human crises of war and famine, moved the world, and even figures like Bob Geldof, who reacted to television pictures and photographs of famine from photojournalists like Tom Stoddart in such a way that Live Aid was born. So yes, next week I'm going to piece together an edit of my time spent with Tom for part of our show. But today I'd like to close with some of Tom Stoddart's real nuggets that he's shared of inspiration and thoughts. Tom's book Eyewitness features an introduction by Bob Geldof, but also by the well-respected journalist Jean-Francois Leroy. And I can't honestly remember, and I'm sure you wouldn't expect me to remember the words that Jean-Francois said, but I'll cross back to my studio self if you don't mind to read a few words from the introduction to Tom's incredibly powerful book Eyewitness. Tom Stoddart. As Jack Lowe said, "Rest in peace, Tom. You clever chap. You clever chap."
Beadnell was visited by a team from the Daily Mirror in Manchester, and they were making a story about the decline of the fishing industry. So they got all the fishermen together. There was about a dozen, and they got some of their sons in the group as well, and the idea was to show that the next generation wasn't going to come through and carry on the traditions. The Mirror ran the story as a double-page spread, and I remember everyone was very excited in the community to see a national paper come here. But what struck me was when the photographer sent complimentary prints to the people in the picture, and he didn't just send the small kind of snaps that I was used to seeing. They were big 16 by 12, beautiful double-weight bromide prints, and it made a big impression on me. I mean, that's 50 years ago, and I was about 12 at the time. So when 5 years later, when I was looking for a career, I saw an advert in the local paper for literally a trainee photographer, and I thought that would be an amazing way to make a living, and so I applied and got the job.
The picture that I am best known for, I think, The Woman of Sarajevo, was a natural to lead on a project where you wanted to celebrate and pay homage to ordinary women doing extraordinary things.
From the very first day, I knew that I would never do anything else, that this was what I would do for the rest of my life.
In my business, it's better to be lucky than good. If you're lucky and you put yourself in these positions time after time, you will find yourself in places which are very important.
I think ideas are the currency of how we exist as professional photographers, because that and the insatiable quest for news and needing to know what's going on anywhere in the world at any given time is crucial, really, to being a photojournalist.
Generally, when I'm shooting, I'm very conscious of dignity, of not poking the camera into people's faces and stripping away their dignity.
For many years, I carried an old Rolleiflex in my bag. I just love the softness of the lens from the old 2¼ square camera, and the way it falls off. And I used to, whenever there was a scene that I thought I needed something a bit different, I would try and get the moment. And I really like this picture because, these siblings have got nothing. They've got no food, got no clothes. All they've got is the bowl that they were getting aid from Médecins Sans Frontières. But there's a lovely magic moment between them, and the Rollie has really captured it beautifully. It's a lovely print when it's printed big.
Allow me to conclude with a comment on Tom, said Jean-François Leroy at the front of the book Eyewitness. The person, one of the most modest, discreet and generous people I've been lucky enough to meet. A man as exceptional as his photos, who never puts himself before the interests of the people he chooses to photograph. A rare and powerful achievement.
When do you stop?
You never stop. I don't see the point of stopping, and why stop when you enjoy it so much, and it's such an amazing way of living.